Greetings, gamers, and welcome to the 6th live stream from MisfitGamersStudios. I'm your host, Vortex, and this is D&D Discussions. Today, we're going to be discussing Magic and High Point. During my last stream with Kage, I started to begin. Yes, I started to begin. Let's begin at the beginning. I started to discuss some aspects about magic in my realm, and just realized it was a much bigger topic, wasn't going to get too much of it that day, so I decided I'm just going to do it on a different live stream. I wanted to do this a couple days ago, figured I needed to take some notes so I could stay on topic, began taking notes, and then kept taking notes, and suddenly realized a couple days later, this is a much bigger topic than I anticipated. I think that's because what I was thinking was I was just going to talk about just like a couple of my classes that I made, and then I just realized that in order to talk about those, in order to properly discuss them and make them make sense, I kind of have to talk about how magic works in my realm in general, because I started to realize ahead of time, like a lot of the arguments I was going to have to like defend against in terms of why did I choose a certain name, or aren't I just recreating a different class? Because I realized that like one of my classes could easily just have been called like Artificer, but a couple tweaks here and there is why it's not officially under that Artificer term. So, excuse me. As you can see, or maybe not, I think the quality is good enough for you to kind of make it out. It's not really for you. Most of that's there just for me. I wanted to talk about it, and I wanted to keep some notes, and this is how I keep notes. Bullet point is really the best way I do it. But I figured just me looking up like this is going to be really irritating most of the stream. So I thought I might as well put it up there. I'll be able to walk up there, talk about it a little bit, and you'll be able to follow along, maybe. I don't know. We'll find out. So, Magic and High Point. Magic and High Point isn't anything different or special than it would be anywhere else, I would guess. Except that the way that I have always interpreted how it operates is really what defines how it looks and how it feels in gameplay as well as in roleplay, if that makes sense. And hopefully it will by the end of this. So with normal D&D, you have your magic-based classes, you have your divisions between people that are innately magical, and then you have either classes or races that are innately magical, or those that can learn magic, and you have the difference between your divine magic, which comes from the gods or some kind of higher power, and then you have the arcane magic, which comes from the world and the universe around you. These are all things that I have long since loved about the way that they've described magic in D&D, and those are very deep-seated in mine as well. But across the different editions, a lot has changed over the years, and a lot of different things have popped up. We have one of the original concepts of the weave. I think that ended up changing or was redefined in a different edition as just I would have to go look it up. But I remember that as the editions continued, it changed. And I started to take bits and pieces of what I learned from each edition and started to craft a way that I liked how it sounded, the way that magic worked. And for the most part, whether you call it the weave or whether it's just an innate ability for creatures, whether there's no fundamental overseen way that magic works in your realm, I do like the concept that whatever you want to call magic has basically two components, and it's the source and the access. That's kind of way up at the top there. Now, with source and access, basically where the magic comes from. That can be from the divine, that could be from nature, that could be from a plane of existence, or it can be from what I like to call mantles. We'll get into those later. But basically, the source of magic is, again, the source of what's providing the power. God, excuse me. Was this today the right day? Either the source is just basically what's providing the power, or what is being tapped into in order to make the magical effects happen. Then you have the access. The access is the methodology behind it. Now, this is where things get really fun for me in terms of magic, is being able to decide how that access to those sources, because the sources are really already there for me. I don't really have too many specialty sources, although I do have just some of my own, but really it's the access that I felt, I don't want to say was lacking in D&D. There's a lot of different subclasses, there's a lot of different ways of doing magic, but when it came down to gameplay, I really wanted something a little bit different, a little bit more for different types of players. And even for me, I like variety. Sometimes I just want to play a magic user differently than just here's a list of spells or here's a different personality. How are they going to cast this same list of spells? Or, oh, you're evil this time. Here's a different list of spells. But I wanted something a little bit more. So that's what we're going to get into. I don't really want to get into the entire history of all the normalcy of D&D, but I mean, you have your standard classes. You know, you have your wizard, which has their spells. You have the sorcerer, which is supposed to have their innate ability to cast magic. You have your clerics, which get it from the divine. You have your warlocks, which usually would tend to get it from a greater, like, you know, entity, not necessarily the same as a cleric, but they would make a pact or a deal, and they would get it that way. You have your bard, which can get it from a variety of different ways depending on which, you know, what you like to follow. And then, of course, later editions, you know, you have artificers and a lot of different, you know, druids, you have rangers, monks. So you do have a lot of different ways that magic can work. So I don't dislike any of them, and a lot of them, I mean, I've used most of those in my time, but where I wanted to differentiate some of them was not so much to rename them, but I wanted to add some interesting classes that are influenced from the pop culture references that I use that really kind of define how my realm work and just how I like to game in general. So let's talk about. I want to go back to the sources real quick, just because this will make sense later, or this will be important later. So you have different types of sources, right? So you have like planes of existence. So if you're going to be using fire magic, depending on whether you're able to tap into magic because it's an innate ability of yours or your family, or it's because you've made a pact with a demon, or because your god says you can, whatever your reason for access, the source may be, you know, your deity. The source may be from the fire plane if you're casting fireball. But there's also the option of mantles. Now, mantles in my realm are essentially they're areas of magic, they're sources of magic that exist because other things exists. So mantles, I get this concept also from the Dresden Files series. So I really like the way that they described mantles as being essentially like power vacuums in a sense. There is a necessity for something to control what is, and therefore that mantle exists in order to be possessed. So I don't know really how else to describe it. But essentially, like, if you have another good way to describe it too is the same way how Neil Gaiman described it in the book Old Gods, to where gods are created, mantles are created the same way out of different necessities. So there are mantles of power. Excuse me. There are mantles of power that exist because of mindsets, because of the fact that mortals exist, because of contradictions. I don't want to get too much into it because I wasn't really planning on going in that direction, but I do want to just preface the fact that mantles are just essentially different sources of power that wouldn't normally exist naturally, but they exist because they are a byproduct of a greater source that isn't in it of itself a powerful source, but the byproduct of that source existing creates a mantle. That mantle therefore then needs to be utilized as a sense like a power vacuum. Man, I'm bad at it. I was not planning on explaining that today, so that was not a good explanation. Hopefully, we will get into that in a different episode. Um, but yeah, mantles of power are interesting. It's a much bigger term because it's not just sources of magic, it's a lot of different things. So again, similar to the Dresden series, mantles can be positions that need to be manned, or essentially large pockets of power that need to be contained in an entity, and that entity needs to be able to control it. It can just be vast voids of power that need to be tapped into once in a while to maintain stability. Those are essentially what mantles are. But again, they only exist because they're byproducts of other things. They wouldn't exist normally without the other many things existing to create them. It's also similar to if you hear me talk about later on like higher level gaming, the way that like gods exist and the way that they draw power from the universe and from their followers. Essentially, without followers, gods would eventually die off. It's similar to how Neil Gaiman in Old Gods talked about it, where you eventually will fade if you're never spoken of, if you're never thought about, if nothing's ever fueling you, you will eventually fade out. And in the same thing with with new gods and similar to mantles, enough focus and concentration can create something new that needs to then take control of that newfound byproduct of power. So the same thing works with gods and powers. The more they're used, more powerful they are. The less they're used, the less powerful they become. So when you have all of that, how I broke out my different types of classes is really looking at the factors of how I wanted to play them. That was the big reason why I kind of wanted to change some of these up. Well, not only did I want to just the way I wanted to play Magic differently and the way I wanted to play these classes differently, but it was also the way that I wanted to role play some of the way that I want to do Magic. I just realized that it's really bright on my light. I'm gonna grab the thing real quick and I'm gonna turn this down because it seems a little bright on my face when I'm over here. Oh, that's a little better. Yeah. Okay. So I just wanted an option to see if I could play these a little bit differently, and I started playing around with these a couple years ago, and I've just been tinkering with them ever since. Um, they're balanced, in some ways, and not very balanced in others. But again, when it comes to balancing, I need to do an episode on this. When it comes to balancing really depends on your gameplay, your like gaming group, and your campaign, and not so much about like the specs, because I've seen a lot of ways that things that seem way overpowered can be balanced and underpowered that can be balanced. It really comes down to understand that yes, on paper some of these things may not be balanced, but it's also the gaming world that I have and the players that I've had. That's a lot of the way that I'm balancing these things. So you'll see that if you can see, you'll see a lot of the same names around here. Obviously, I have bards. Bards pretty much work as you would expect them through the books. I don't really change bards up until they reach level 10. And really, the only difference that I do with bards. Jesus, this was the wrong day to do this. My allergies, man. Excuse me. So, the only real change. Jesus. Quality. Quality streaming right here, ladies and gentlemen. Quality. So, with Bard. I didn't change Bard up a lot in terms of how they operate. Most of the time, they will operate exactly as they do in the books. The biggest changes I did were because of the way magic operates and the hierarchy of magic in my realm operates. Bards have a higher potential than most, and that's one of the key aspects of Bard is they have the most potential in my realm in terms of the hierarchy of magic. The reason this is after level 10, Bards have a unique opportunity to start doing really special stuff because of the way that magic, music, words, all of that play a very big part. And in my realm, I alluded to, or I think I just straight flat out said it in one of my other streams, that magic, in terms of the hierarchy of magic, music is pretty much like the top tier mortal magic. It is the closest that can, it's the closest that a mortal can reach to divine magic in terms of its actual usage. It's basically, yeah, music is the has the ultimate potential of all magic. Now, it doesn't necessarily mean that all bards are the most powerful right out the gate. It doesn't mean that bard magic and musical magic are outright just going to be the most powerful. It's the most potential. And it's because of the way that magic works in my realm, and the way that I see how that flow works. So, with magic, I essentially kind of break it down to it's a type of energy. It's a unique energy. It's not just like the same energy as we would have it in physics, but I like to break it down into the similar concept of its unique types of energies. When it comes to music, music is something that combines all of the different art forms of magic. You have the verbal, you have the symmetrical, you have the material components. You have all of that that can be brought in together. But then on top of that, you are adding so much more. You are being able to gather energy from outside. You are able to produce and filter energy from within. It's something that is a mental stimulation as well as a physical stimulation. You're adding your mind, body, and soul into this. Whereas, yes, all of the other magics can do that, but that's why when it comes to bard magic, it adds all of them in a way that allows the manipulation to be so much more versatile, so much more, unlike mages, where I've said before, mages have the most control over magic. They have the most fine-tuned control. No one can beat a mage in terms of expertise in what they can do with it, but no one can touch and weave magic and manipulate magic like a bard. The bard has the most potential in the way that magic just operates around them if they know what they're doing, which is why the minimum cap for even unlocking any of that is level 10. And then after that, it's a bunch of in-game stuff as well as some rolls to even see if you have the chance, or if you haven't already had it based on your story, you would basically have to have some reason to go and have that opportunity. So again, bards for the most part, they're pretty much the same, but they have a very unique opportunity because they have the most potential. I consider this innate magic. Usually, you can learn to be a bard. Like, anyone can learn to play music in my realm, but bard magic is something that you would have to be innately magical in order to be a magical bard in my realm. And I also base this type of magic on charisma. The reason for that is because the idea is that you are, again, you're one of the few magic users that really innately can, like, essentially infuse your magic with your soul, which is something that I typically reserve only for wizards. And that's also a ritualistic thing where it's called soul magic. I get that from the Dresden series as well, and it does exist in my realm. Most other types of mages can't even comprehend doing it. It's banned. If you're a regular mage, it's banned. Wizards are the only ones that the other classes that would ever do it, and bards do it kind of naturally. So that's why it's based on charisma, because it's truthfully based off of their output of their own energy. They do, I prefer using them with spell slots instead of like memorization, because the idea is that they are either ad-libbing or it's known songs. They don't memorize songs. You could also go that way of, you're memorizing things, but I don't want to limit my bards to having to be performers every time they want to do something. So I like the idea of spell slots, because what they do is usually ad-libbed, and it doesn't necessarily have to be always specific to a type of performance. And I don't know what I wrote up there. Hang on. So with the spell slots, one of the balancing things that I did was I like the idea of spell slots. So you have so many spell slots per level. I have a reference in one book about spell slots. I forget, I didn't write it down, so dumb me. I'll have to look into that later if someone wants to know. But once you know your spell slots, what I like to do is kind of like with memorization or with clerics, you do have to pre-select the spells that you would like to fill for that day. So kind of like with second edition memorization on mages, or even with clerics, at the beginning of the day, you would kind of prep a spell list, and these would be your pre-selected spells, and then you would be able to use your slots for that. And that what I do like about bards though is I do like the ad lib ability. So what I would normally say is that you can have a list of spells ready to go, and you would have your spell slots able to to cast those guys out. But you also have the ability with a roll to ad lib a like a spell change. So you have a pre list of spells. You could basically just cast at will, or with your spell slots freely, without having to do anything special. But let's say you wanted to change it up because the situation has changed. You are a creator or a performer of some sort with a certain type of role. Again, I haven't run into a lot of situations, so I'm still deciding if it's a percentile role. But the idea would be it's kind of like a spell fail roll. I'm thinking about going to like second edition rules with that on spell fail percentage. So I would do some sort of roll to see whether or not they could pull it off, because they're basically expending the spell slot to do something that they hadn't planned to do. And for the most part, I think it would work, except, again, depending on the role, how good it would work, and then there'd be some, fun messing around with it. But you also got to think that they are still expending a spell slot, so you're still going to do something magical. It just may be it's going to be somewhere in between, one of the spells that you knew and one of the spells that you were attempting. And spell level goes along with what it goes with in the book. All right, I'm going to be right back. I'm going to go try to clear my throat real quick before I continue, and then we will move on to what I consider a mage. All right. So, when I talk about the mage class in my realm, this would be, I guess, the typical wizarding class, or the wizard class for I guess most people. This one is pretty much by the book wizard. You have your spells by your spell memorizations, so you can only have so many spells. You can have specialties if you want. You can have an optional like a school focus. So if you want to, for me, if you want to be able to have a school specific, like you can just have here are the spells that you can have per level, and here's the spell list and all of that. But you can unlock certain types of higher level spells if you wanted to like master a certain type of school. I would also let you be able to do certain like customary things with certain types of spells, and it would just basically allow you to do more within a certain sphere versus just being kind of like the jack of all trades. I can do magic. So the mage is kind of one of those just more or less by the book, magic spellcaster. Nothing really special. Haven't really changed a whole lot. Haven't really added anything. It's still intelligence based. I allow this to be a learned one, so it doesn't have to be innately magical, because in my realm, when it comes to being a mage, it's not about having innate power. It's about being able to understand the tools that you're working with. So it's understanding how to say the words. Like, I mean, it's only as hard as it would be to learn Latin and to learn, kanji and to learn how to read tea leaves. You know, it's like as difficult as all of that would be to do all at the same school, all at the same time. All of those things together, if learned properly, produce magic. So you don't have to. Now, that's what I like to, kind of have with, whereas with the bard, who essentially manipulates magic, like with that, I kind of like to, essentially I use the term vibing with the bard, as as cliche as that would sound, because he's vibing. I like that term because, like I said, he innately uses soul magic, so you are literally vibing with the energies of magic to do the manipulation. Mages are all external, so when it comes to mages, everything is a tool. So the words you're using are a tool. What you're writing, the components you're holding, the way that you're moving your hands, everything is telling the energies all around you what to do. And that's essentially what mages are. They are the external magic users, but because of their understanding of the tools, that's why being a mage allows you to create pretty much any spell you want. Like, you can do the most intricate things. And one of the things I like to mention is, like, if you're like a wizard, and we'll get into this a little bit, but wizards are more about raw power. So a wizard would be able to summon raw flames from the elemental plane naturally. They could just boom. It's not quite a fireball, but they'd be able to just rip fire from the elemental plane and hurl it at you at great force. That would be devastating, and it would probably hurt more than a fireball, but it would not be nearly as elegant. I know, elegant with fireball, but it would basically just be a wall of inferno instead of a fireball coming out of nowhere. Whereas a sorcerer would have more like a just wall of fire or a cone of fire. They'd be able to summon it naturally, little bit more finesse. It would take them a lot more longer to control it, but in my mind, their power is a lot more organic than it would be refined. So they might be able to pull off a standard fireball with enough focus. Whereas a wizard with enough focus would be able to do a wall of fire, but fireballs would still be a lot more challenging because it's a lot more refined. Yeah, they would basically be able to just do small orbs of fire. I know I'm being pedantic about that, but words matter in my realm. But essentially the idea is that, again, a wizard just hurls fire like a catapult. Sorcerer throws fire like, I guess, just a basketball. And then wizards, even though they're fireball, like, whereas the other two could refine their ability to not be as chaotic, a wizard can take fireball, turn it into any shape, any size, any color, any element they wanted, and there would be nothing to them. So again, wizard, inferno from the fire plane. You have a sorcerer who could basically just hurl fire towards you, but again, a little bit more control. And then a wizard could basically take that fire and do anything he wants with it with the right spell. So spells are just very, very controlled mechanisms of all of these things. And in the right hands and with the right understanding, they are considered to be the most powerful, not the strongest, but the most powerful because they have the most control. So in my realm, in terms of in-game lore, everyone regards mages as essentially the most powerful because of the abilities and the control they have over magic. The next one I go into is sorcerer. So with this one I've taken a little bit of liberties. Again, I know that we already have a sorcerer race. It's still the same concept in terms of you still have this as their innate ability. So this isn't something that you can learn. You can't learn to be a sorcerer. A sorcerer is someone who has to innately have the magical ability. Then you have a choice essentially in my realm. You can either be a spell sorcerer, which essentially is sorcerer from the book. So it follows everything from the book, follows the spell progression. All of that is normal. If you want to be what I like to call a component sorcerer, that's the sorcerer that I made. That's my class of sorcerer. And a component sorcerer is essentially one that works in the same realm of the normal. It has you have innate abilities. It's based on your wisdom though, because instead of memorizing things, essentially in my realm, sorcerers have the same access to the spells that a mage would. So you still have the same spell access per level as you would in the books. The difference is, if you want, and then you can still opt to have a school focus. The biggest difference is that with mages, the school focus, the optional school focus is more like a learned one. You're deciding what school you're going to focus on. The optional school focus as a sorcerer in my realm, if you're going to use mine, would be more of an innate change to how your powers would work. So you'd have a more of affinity instead of interest. I'd give you more of an affinity to certain types of spells, and you'd have some perks based on which one you chose, right? So depending on if it's an element or a type of magic, maybe the components would be easier to find for you in that particular school, or you'd be able to have access to higher levels of magic in that school. With this one, though, instead of memorization and spell slots, what this one is, it's all about components. So the way that I built the sorcerer is because that you are innately controlling magic, you're allowing magic to essentially flow through you. You are a filter for that. And so with that filter, you are able to, kind of like an artificer. So this is where it was not quite an artificer, because artificer, I consider artificer more on like a meta magic level, and we'll talk about that towards the end. But an artificer sees ways that things can work and how magic flows through other objects and puts those things together. So they see magic, I call it meta magic, because they see, in my realm, they see magic differently. They just innately understand how things put together in certain ways and with their intent, because their intent is needed. Intent's always needed with magic, but their intent, along with the way that they see magic flowing, is what makes their magic work. A sorcerer, they essentially naturally have all of the energies around flowing through them, and they act as kind of like that filter. So what I allow is that they can create magical items that are the spells. So essentially, kind of like how a mage would memorize a spell, a cleric would pray for one, a bard would prepare one or practice one. A sorcerer will make one. And the nice thing about this, the balancing, is they don't have to do it at the beginning of the day. They can make it at any time. But the limitations of it are kind of what make it more role play based. This is my attempt at making a more role play based magic user. So with this, in order to cast a spell, cast meaning essentially what you're doing is you're creating a trinket, you're creating what was I thinking? I had a word for this. You're essentially creating a magical item, a container of sorts for that magical spell. And when activated, that spell will go off. So you're essentially prepping a spell for later use. But unlike a mage who has to have casting time, since you've pre-prepped the spell the prepping time is the casting time of the spell, and however long, depending on the materials you make, however long it would physically take you to create the object. But essentially, you're casting these things into these objects, so therefore they can be cast at any time. So the idea is that for the spell to be created, it is you need 2 components, 2 plus 1 per level components. So for a level 1 spell, you need 2 components plus 1 per level, so that would be 3 components for a level 1 spell. Components are the RP part of this. This is the roleplay part. This is between me and my player, you and your DM if you want to use something like this. The idea is that if you wanted to create, I think I made the same reference because this was like one of the first spells I thought of when I first created this class and created my own character, to have a buddy of mine run a game real quick to test it out. But like, let's say you learn like invisibility. I don't even know if that's a level 1 spell off the top of my head. Man, I'm bad at this memorization stuff. Anyway, let's say you wanted to learn invisibility or do invisibility, like minor invisibility. If like, let's say you had like you were just looking for 3 components to cast that spell. I think I used like a feather to be like the silent aspect, like the wafting on air. I think I used a string as the binder, to keep the spell together because they all needed to be done. And then I think I used like a piece of wax, like a little wax bead or a little wax ball, as the like the translucent aspect to be invisible. Tied it all together, infused the spell, and then later, whenever I would like snap it between my fingers, essentially smashing the wax ball and fusing it together would be the activation spell, and then I would cast invisibility. But this would be again RP based. It would allow for kind of the same thing where you could make a list of things that particular character uses, and that would just be like, they would be no different than a mage, carrying, magic components with them and having a box of just magical components, or always keeping up, if you found something that works, you can reuse it. But the idea is that in a pinch, you just need to find things that will work RP wise, and the DM would be available. I will get into a better example of what I mean by like, because each one, again, with balancing, each one is supposed to be utilized differently in different situations. In a perfect situation, they all work great, right? You'll all have your spells, you'll have them pre-done, and you'll be useful. But I wanted to look at what are some of the situations that would be less useful or less planned for. And I'll get into that after I talk about Wizard. But one of those things is like what happens, like let's say you were all knocked out, or let's say like one of my favorites is you're all knocked out, you wake up, like let's say you had a whole party of wizards, right? You have a wizard, you have a sorcerer, you have a bard, and a mage. And they all get knocked out, thrown in prison, and they all wake up without their stuff. This is where I got really tired of the same old, like, oh, well, I don't have my spell book and I can't memorize my spells. Oh, shucks. So I wanted a different reaction to that. And that's one of my favorite, like, examples of how I, like, wanted to test these. In the very beginning, this is how I created some of them. Was this scenario was really like, okay, how could I balance out magic users in a scenario where they've been unconscious and they have all their stuff taken? So we'll get into that and how each of them, in my realm, the idea of how each of them are supposed to react to that situation after I finish with sorcerer and talk about wizard. So with the sorcerer, it's 2+1 components per level of the spell. Now, once the spell's been approved by the DM and created, the item will be charged for 24 hours. After 24 hours, the item needs to be reinfused, which at this point the sorcerer can just choose to reinfuse it, kind of like a sorcerer or kind of like an artificer, and the spell continues for another 24 hours. Or they can choose to reabsorb the energy, and that energy will go into the next spell. Or since it's been 24 hours, they don't reabsorb it, the energy just gets dispersed. Or they can just immediately use the spell. But the spell will either fizzle out of the object, or actually no, I'm sorry. It would either fizzle out. The object won't be able to carry it after 24 hours if it's not been used, or it has to be recharged. That's one of the balancing techniques that I did for this one, so that way you don't have basically, just a permanent, always available spell. Like, if you can't attend to your items within 24 hours, tough. But at the same time, as long as you can get to it within 24 hours, your spell's pre-charged. This also works for items that you can hide, items that you can't hide. But yeah, the idea is 24-hour recharge for each spell. So what I like about this is you have to be in... you can like change spells. So like, let's say you've pre-prepped yours and you're like, you know what, I don't need the one I've already prepped. You can essentially reabsorb that energy and then use that to prep another spell. Otherwise you'd have to wait for the 24 hours for the energy to disperse before you can make another one. So it's kind of like a cycling thing, right? So you can only infuse so many items before the energy has to come back to you. Since you kind of have that power vacuum where you've put your energy out, unless it's been used for its purpose or dissipates from the object and returns to you after 24 hours, you can't really reuse it. So you either have to use it, let the magic go, and then allow yourself to recoup, or you have to absorb that energy back. So the 24 hours kind of gives that balance aspect of, if someone were to take your item from you, you can't just create a new one right then and there. You would either have to go touch the item to get your magic back, or wait until you got your magic back after the diffusal. Um, and yeah, I really like this because I think it gives a lot of opportunities, and it can be really unique because you can make small carryable items that are just single spell, use spells, and then you can also just infuse larger things that you've made that are innocuous that to other people that they don't realize have the magic in them. So you can get really creative. I'm not talking about artificer level of creating like machines and stuff, but just being able to have like little things like create a bracelet or a ring that you wear that no one really actually knows is, a spell, and maybe that spell is a contingency. So as long as it's upkept every 24 hours, maybe you have like, a contingency spell. And since you have a lot of spells at your advantage, you figure it out. I mean, let your imagination wander and think about what you can do if you can create anything that just has a contingency that is with you at all times. So I think it has a lot of potential. I think it could be really fun to play. But yes, the idea is instead of being spell based, this is component based. So you need to be creative. You need to have the components, and you need to know how to make them useful. And I think that could be a lot of fun, especially with a 24-hour charge. I have some other things that I haven't written up here, but some things that I have thought of as well for like expansion is at higher tier levels being able to allow other people to use your magical items, because it's right as of like low levels it's just you, like only you can interface with it. I think level 5 is a little too low for most gaming campaigns because reaching level 5 is pretty quick, but it would be really interesting either level 5 or level 10 to allow your items to be like, so if I made that little thing of invisibility, if someone else had it and they activated it, they could either people that I've allowed to, like I've marked, or when you make it, maybe you could assign people while you're making the item, say me and this person, this person, this person can activate it. I don't know how. I think that would be a DM decision. I haven't really figured out exactly the best way to do that, but it hasn't really come up yet because no one's made it that high of a level. In a sorcerer, no one's really played it outside of some of my test runs. So I really think that being able to have other people use your magic would be really interesting. But yeah, let me know what you think on that one. I consider this one to be the most versatile. So this one gets the rank of most versatile. So the mages, they have the most control. Bards have the most potential. This one's the most versatile because, again, in a pinch, you don't need access to anything to create your... Well, you need access to anything to create your magic. Like, you can create your spells out of anything as long as you can justify it, right? I mean, you can't just say, well, I take a stick and some dirt and, now I have, like fireball. Like, that doesn't make any sense. But if you can make it make sense in you and your DM, or even to me, if you make it make sense in the sense of the physics and the way that the intent of how you want the magic to work and how the flow of magic would make sense for these things in terms of whether it's their elemental components, how the materials can be operated, whatever. The idea is it's more RP based because it gives you more opportunities than just reading your spell book and being, stocked up on just a certain list of spells. And I think it gives a lot more opportunities for things like having your item stolen makes a much bigger difference. It's not just a single book that you have to be worried about. Having your item stolen, is more of a detriment, but at the same time, 24 hours later and you're fine. So it just adds some different gameplay aspects. Now, moving on to... Hang on a second. I have a note up there. So that was the most versatile sorcerer... Wisdom. Hey, would you stop that? My cat is trying to eat the cords. Oh, you went outside because you're wet. I have the garden on right now. The sprinklers on, and he must have gone outside. Sorcerer. I have a T up there. Why do I have a T up there? Oh, that's right. Because I think I wanted to talk about potions under sorcerer a little bit. Yeah, I think that when it comes to this, and I don't think I would really consider this being much for like potion making. I think this would be more for like direct spell casting. But it would be interesting to see, like, play around with some aspects of potion making with this. So yes. So anyway, on to wizard. So this particular class is primarily based off of the Dresden Files series, and Harry Dresden's mage, or his wizard. So with this wizard, this one, you have to be innate, but it also has to be learned. So it's one of those kind of you have to be innately magical to even begin this path, but you also have, it's a lot of learning. So this one, unlike mage, though it's not intelligence based, this one's going to be constitution based, because I have a lot of different mechanics based around like fatigue, since this is a much more raw power magic. This one's going to be much more fatigue based, but you also have access to a lot of different types of magic with this, so it gets a little crazy. So with this one is considered the most powerful in terms of the most raw power. So when we're talking about magic, bards have the most potential, mages have the most control, and are considered the most powerful because they can do the most with it. But although they have the most fine-tuned control and can do pretty much anything with magic that the tools will let them, no one's going to blow for blow hit harder than a wizard. I mean, if we're talking about just raw damage, raw power, raw force, no one's going to top a wizard in what their potential is, what they can bring to the table, because they are one of the more chaotic types of magic usage. They have so much more raw strength in terms of what they can do, but it's also harder to control. So that's why that learning aspect comes in. Being a wizard, you get access to a few things that you still would have access to with other types of magic users, but this tends to be the way that you infuse things. I don't know. Again, some of these things I haven't fully fleshed out, because some of the things I've put under this class could be opened up to other classes, in terms of they aren't necessarily like magically specific. They're just more from the Dresden Files series. And so far I'm allowing wizards access to them, because I also don't want to it makes them already a little bit overpowered, but there's kind of a reason, because yes, they are overpowered, but to get overpowered in any particular thing, you have to spend a lot of time in it. And by having a lot of access to these things, it makes it more difficult to want to specialize, so it actually makes it harder to be OP, if that makes sense. That's the mindset. It's almost a detriment to be specialized until endgame, and then it's a boon. So you basically have to play that game of, do I want to be good the entire playthrough, or do I want to be crap for the longest time until I'm really finally good? But with wizards, I have some fun little things that I like to do. There's another podcast that I used to listen to, and it was called Homebrew D&D, and there was a character in that I loved what they did for the podcast. And every time that they cast a spell, they had created just like their character in game, well, and the player, of course, always had like a catchphrase, or like, basically a magic word that they would use, and it would always just be something comical. I think Booyakasha was like one for like a fireball, and it's really funny stuff. I loved listening to it. And in Dresden, they have something similar, to where every wizard had to, the wizard has to make it personal, because you're the one controlling it. It's one of the few that this is extremely personal, and that's why you have to learn so much. And so what I wanted to do is try to incorporate that into this usage, whereas the sorcerer would have to sit there and think about how the item is going to be created, what it's going to be created out of, and all of that. With the wizard, what I wanted them to do is, you're going to have to do a couple rolls to essentially learn the spell, try it out a couple times. But when you do, basically by the time you've learned it, you have to have assigned it some sort, depending on the type of spell we're casting, you have to start deciding those components. So it's not quite creating your own spells, but depending on what you want to do, again, more roleplay based, but me and my player, you and your DM would work with each other on what are the verbal, the symmetrical, and the material components for this spell, what makes the most sense. And once you've gotten a chance to fine tune it, and usually this process is how you create the spell. You know, you're going to be like, I want to use these three things. We'll do some rolls based on your rolls, how successful it is, and then we'll fine tune what components. You know, was it the right word? Was it the right hand gesture? Do you even need components? Do you even need to say a word? So we decide all of that. And then once you have it locked in place, it's up to you to remember to do it at all times. And that's kind of it. If you want to do that magic, you have to remember the word that you used. You have to make sure that you also have the component on hand. Like, the idea is we're kind of essentially creating our own spells here, but they're not perfectly fine-tuned to do anything you want. They're just custom built for how your character is throwing magic around. For those of you that know the Dresden series, I think you'll have a much better understanding of what I mean, in terms of it could be very customizable to each character. For those who don't understand, it's basically an allowance to allow you to be a lot more creative in the type of magic you're wielding without creating crazy, overpowered spells. You're basically just trying to make magic and the various elements do things they're not normally supposed to do that in a moment would make sense without a lot of thought and without a lot of effort. The benefit of this is over time, you can make a lot of effort be able to, like, if you could do something in the background where over time you could create very, very overpowered things that you could do at a moment's notice because you've been practicing them. So that's another aspect about the wizard that's nice, is it's not always in the moment. It's repetitive work will create opportunities to do more and more things. This also comes with certain types of rituals, but I've also taken a lot of these things from Dresden, and those the certain things are just kind of innate into the world or into my realm. So you do have ritual magic with wizards, but that's not really much different than how rituals work with the other mages, so that's just more of a side note. If you are a wizard, though, in my realm, you do get the sight innately. This is something that is covered in the Dresden series. You do get the sight, and you get the ability to soul gaze. Now, with that, I have asterisks, but I don't have explanations for the asterisks. Great. But essentially, you have the ability to do the sight naturally, which is something that only certain types of other creatures and races in my realm actually have the ability to have. But it is something that anybody with innate magic can learn how to do. It's extremely difficult and not advised. This is something that wizards can do where essentially they can open up their third eye and they can see the world in a way that nobody else can, kind of a more natural way that the world works. You kind of see beyond some of the mortal layers and just see how everything moves and operates. You see things for what they really are in a way that your mind can only barely comprehend, and even in some cases it can't. The more incomprehensible something is, the worse it is for you, and it's very hard. And just like in the Dresden series, things like this, things seen with a third eye, can't be forgotten. They're always excruciating detail. And you get more than just looks. You get feelings. You get so much in this that it's typically not advisable to go out of your way to get this or even use it if you have it, because it can drive you mad, and things that you see can also just be disturbing, or it can take a toll on your mind. So I haven't really fleshed this next part out, but I do have sort of like a mental health counter when it comes to using the site, and the more it's been used, the more counters you get, just the harder everything becomes for playing that character. But you get some really interesting information, so use it how you will. Along with the sight, you get to do what is called soul gazing. Again, comes innately to you. Soul gazing does not come innately to everybody with the sight. It's the soul gaze isn't necessarily tied to the sight. The soul gaze is something that's a little bit different, but I'm kind of tying it to the sight in my world just because it makes more sense for other things in the background. So for those of you Dresden Files likers, it's basically the same thing. Or I know that it's not the same thing. I know that it's two different things that he can do. Sight's the third eye. Soul gaze is something that he just has naturally. I'm just combining them in my world because it makes more sense that there are only certain types of people that can do soul gazing, but if you can learn to do the third eye, you can also learn to do a soul gaze with other prerequisites. It's more complicated than it needs to be. It's just how I DM. I apologize. But anyway, as a wizard, you can also do a soul gaze, which is again, just pretty much the same way as it works in the book. You get to look at somebody. It only gets to work one time, but you get to look at them. They get to look at you, and you get to see exactly everything that they are. You get to see essentially an image or a version of the entity that you're looking at in their absolute truest form, the way that it can be represented to you. That basically means that, different people would see different things from different entities or from the same entity, but what you see is extremely graphic. Not necessarily bad or good. I just mean graphic as in it's very fine detail, extremely potent. You cannot forget what you see, but you get to see into someone. You get to see something that they can't hide. And it does get to go both ways. So both people will have the same experience. So if you're doing it in my realm, especially to NPCs, just be careful because they're getting the same insight on you. But that insight isn't always understandable. You're going to see things. You might hear things. You might experience things through that soul gaze. And it's up to you to determine what those things mean. But they will be absolutely true to that entity that you're looking at. So it's fun. I haven't really got to play around with this too much, but I'm excited to start messing with that. Also, when you're a wizard, you do get innate healing powers. I haven't fleshed out exactly what the best part is, but essentially, just like with Dresden Files, no scarring, no permanent scarring, and pretty much everything will heal over time. So you don't really get any major disabilities, but it's not like Wolverine healing. So it's just more of a slow heal, not so much like an HP gain to where you don't have to worry about your own healing. Like, you do have to take care of yourself, you do have to mend bones, but the bones will heal back perfect. You won't have any disfigurements. It's just kind of one of those, if you don't take care of it properly, if you don't splint yourself, it just takes way longer than it should because your body has to figure it out. Through this, I'm not making it required to be a wizard to do this, but I am adding a different type of like potion makings. It's typically called alchemy, but I already have a different type of alchemy, an alchemist in my realm, based off of Full Metal Alchemist. So I don't really want to call it alchemy because it doesn't, like an alchemy, I don't know, it gets confusing with all these names. So I do want to add in, I just have a note here, but I did want to add in the way that potions work in the Dresden Files as well, where you have to have one component for each of the senses, and then you can make a potion out of that. I think that would be really fun to allow players to play with, but it was just something I wanted to mention because I think it's really cool. If you do know about it, or if you haven't, look it up. Even just look at the Dresden fan wiki and really look at how they do potions, because it's a really cool concept, and I think it could be a lot of fun to allow players to make their own potions based off of components that are for each of the 5 senses. Let's see. So let's get into how a wizard's powers work. So we know that mages have spells based on how many levels they have. Sorcerers, they have essentially spell slots, kind of the same way that mages would have spell memorizations. Bards also have spell slots. I'm sorry, sorcerers have, what am I saying? Sorcerers have components. They have how many components they can make, how many spells that they can have out there, how many items that they can have charged. So with wizards, it's all about fatigue based, because just like within Dresden, your ability to cast magic isn't hindered by what you've memorized or what you've prepped that day. It's just how much you know you can do with magic in general. So, in order to make a fatigue based magic user, I wanted to kind of create a way to have a fatigue meter that would scale properly the way it would, that I feel like it would in like a Dresden concept, but also make sure that it also followed a what made sense for spell casting in D&D. So again, didn't want to make it too awful difficult, because again, with wizard you're not really casting the typical spells, but most of what you're doing is going to be based off of something. So the idea that I had here is that for fatigue, wizards are going to have a fatigue counter, or fatigue points equal to their level times their constitution modifier. Now, this is why Constitution, this is why I said earlier that Wizard's based on Constitution, because with this, again, it's all about your fortitude, your ability to keep going. And I like Constitution being a driver for that, because it is your life, it's what alters your hit points. It's what, I like it, the concept of it's your ability to just endure anything, your ability to take poison, your ability to endure, long spurts of stamina, just your ability to live, your desire to live on a physical level is kind of how I like to look at Constitution. So with this, take your con mod, whatever you have. I kind of have a custom one just based off of, the stat modifier up to 5 points, because most of my stuff goes up to 5 if you have a 20. Yes, I do allow 20s on my stat rolls. Yes, you can have multiples. It's a thing, but there's also a reason in my realm why PCs can be that powerful. But yes, technically it is possible to have all 20s. I mean, if you can roll them all, you can roll them all. But yes, it is possible to have all 20s, and it doesn't violate any rules, and it actually isn't as overpowered as you think. But so level times your constitution modifier. The reason I do this is because you're going to have a constitution modifier anywhere from, I mean, if you have a -3 constitution modifier and you're playing a wizard, I don't know what you're doing, but Kage, you need to stop it. Anyway, because you can, based off of your constitution stat roll, you can have negative. I'm going to not even bother. Well, I'm not going to bother going over what the negatives would be right now, because it just doesn't make any sense to do that. That would be more for an NPC. But assuming that you had 0 to 5, this allows for rapid growth over your leveling up to really outpace a lot of the others in terms of raw magic usage, and keep up in terms of being able to not be a glass cannon for too long. So assuming the best case scenario, you had a 5 constitution modifier. I mean, you're talking about 5 fatigue points at level 1, 10, 15, 20 at level 4. I mean, you were already gaining points so quickly at 5 per level. It's insane. And again, it's 5 times your level. So it's not 5 every level. I mean, at that point, at level 10, you have 50 fatigue points. I mean, it's insane, right? So with that, how did fatigue points work? Well, a fatigue point is spent, basically a spell's level, like whatever you're trying to do, the equivalent spell level would be the fatigue point. So if you're trying to basically do something like Fireball, it would be a fatigue point of that level. Now, I haven't gone through plenty of spells yet, and again, because this one doesn't really follow the traditional casting spells, because it's more raw power, it's going to be more of there's going to be a base fatigue point, and then there's going to be an ability to boost the spell. So if you want to just say do a Fireball, it might be 2 fatigue points, but then you can throw in 2 or 3 more fatigue points to essentially boost that up. Now, I don't like the term fatigue points. I haven't really found a good, again, because I don't have players, I don't work on everything all the time when no one's using it. So fatigue points right now are just a placeholder, but the idea is that you can infuse your spells to make them more powerful by essentially, using more fatigue, more of your your endurance, your stamina, in order to pump these up. So with that, Yeah, so you can use fatigue points for that. You can convert fatigue points either to boost the spell, or you can convert fatigue points into like an ability. So let's say you wanted to do something like not superhuman, but let's say you wanted a spurt of strength or a longer jump, or you wanted to just do something that magic would be able to potentially assist with. You can use these fatigue points in order to enhance abilities or possibly change a roll. Recovery of these is 1d4 fatigue points per hour of actual rest. So a short rest, you'd get 4d4. Long rest, you'd get 8d4. And that really makes more sense the higher levels you get. And that may change. I may up that d8 or that d4 to like a d6 after like level 5 or something. Again, it just depends on how things play out. Now, when it comes to the fatigue points, the reason why I call them fatigue points, or at least why they're meant to indicate fatigue, is because there's going to be penalties. Kind of like in the Dresden series, if you do read it or listen to it, which I highly suggest you do, it takes a lot out of you to use magic. And so I figured that with fatigue, it's going to be based on how many fatigue points you have left, because essentially the fatigue points are how much willpower, and I might even just call it will points, but it's basically how much willpower you have left. It's how much you have left in you before your body, your mind is going to collapse and you have nothing left. Because as a wizard, you are putting yourself into these spells, and just, if you're pushing, Gale Force Winds, it's just like trying to push, a semi-truck in neutral. It's going to take a lot out of you physically, mentally, emotionally, and if you drain yourself, you will collapse. You will go limp. You will go unconscious. And so I wanted to create a step down process that made sense for that. Now, I've always liked looking at things like fatigue and how to balance fatigue. I've always found a way to do that is to look at it in the case of actually one of my favorite movies, how they put, how to, I forget what the word is. Basically, it was a movie about how they put how to push yourself. I don't know how many people saw the movie Gattaca or even remember that movie, but there was a great scene where the brothers would swim in the ocean, and they would race out, and basically the idea was who could swim further wins. And one day, I think the little brother who always lost finally won. And when he was asked how he did it, because it was just always he would never, basically it was always the weaker kid, so he was never able to go do it. And when the older brother finally asked him, hey, how did you beat me? How did you do that? Well, he basically explained it that when you're doing that, when you're swimming out as far as you can in the ocean, you can really only ever give 50%. Because you have to save the 50% for the ride back. Now, maybe you could say 60% because you can ride the waves back in and you have a little help. But the idea is kind of like, or you use the term in the forest, you can only run 50% of the way into a forest because then you're running out. The idea is that I like this analogy because it works the same way almost with magic, where if you think about this in terms of fatigue in a way that you're not just doing something within the boundaries. This is kind of like how hit points aren't just, you get punched and you could die if you're a commoner. No, it's hit points are meant to be the exhaustion of people in life or death. And I like the idea of magic to be, especially for a wizard, to be an emphasis of that. And so the idea that you have a penalty for less exhaustion means that the higher levels, cheaper spells cost you nothing and aren't as dangerous, but still you have to manage it because too much can still be detrimental to you. So, with the idea from the Gattaca movie, the idea that his reasoning was that he didn't hold back, he didn't save anything for the swim back, so he pushed more than 50%, and that's how he beat his brother. When he was swimming out there, he said that he didn't save anything he was not planning on swimming back. And I just, it's one of those mindsets where I love that idea for Wizard, where you have this pool of energy that is basically everything that you have to give. And it's not death if you pass out, but it's everything you have. And if you hit 0, you pass out because that's your body protecting you. That's not because you don't have anything else left in you. It's because if you were to give more, you're giving more than you could healthfully give. Essentially, you'd be giving your life essence, which a wizard can do in the Dresden series and which you can do in this. So that's why the fatigue meter goes to 0 when you don't have those fatigue points, because your body will shut off before you kill it. That doesn't mean you can't go beyond it. It just means that your body will try to stop you. So with that, I like the idea of the 50% mark, because once you push past 50%, that you start to get into that mindset of, oh, I'm not coming back. And the closer you get to 0, the closer you're accepting that you're probably going to give it everything you have, and you're going to push yourself because you have to. So with that being said, however many fatigue points you have, however many points that you have based on your level times your constitution modifier, once you reach 50%, whatever your number is, that's when you're going to start noticing that you're in the fatigued state. And so at 50%, you begin to have a -1 to your AC and a -10 to your movement speed. It's not a lot, but it's just enough to keep you aware that you are now pushing yourself. And if you don't wrap things up, things are only going to get worse. This isn't really a great big deal, because usually 1 AC, even though wizards aren't that great and you can kind of be a glass cannon, a -1 AC basically tells you, be more cautious. And then the -10 to your movement speed is just kind of the first indication that you are not on your full game, and that, it's taking a toll on your body. You need to pay attention. I might increase this to penalties every 10% after. If I ever get a character to level 10 on a wizard, I'll probably increase the penalties to every 10%. So at 50%, this is the first penalty. Then at 40%, there's a penalty. Hey! At 40%, there'll be a penalty. At 30%, there'll be a penalty. But right now, I only have the 4 penalties. And then, again, I will probably increase this once I have a player that can truly test it, because I don't think that if you have 50 points, I don't think I'm going to wait until you're at half or go from 50 to 25 before you get another penalty. I think there needs to be more penalties, because if you're that powerful, expending that much in a short time frame, because this is the idea, if you have that many hit points or that many fatigue points as a wizard, and you're expending them all that quickly in a very short amount of time, you must be doing something exhaustive. And if you're not, you're doing a very, very powerful fucking spell that's going to be exhaustive. So the idea is that although 50% sounds not that great, because you can get 1d4 for an hour of rest, and an hour of rest could be sitting in a carriage while it's being manned. That is one of the balancing aspects I wanted to do, was how do you make this recoverable without having to do a short and long rest? But how do you also make it to where it really isn't meant to just be, I can just fling magic just because I have it. It's meant to show that you have to be strategic with it, and it's meant to show that you need to be well learned in order to just want to fling magic like this, because this is very powerful magic, and for you to fine tune it and control it, it takes more fatigue points, and you can learn to control it way better, but it takes a lot, and that's why you won't see a lot of wizards just hurling magic everywhere, because the idea is they have to be very economic with everything they do. So at 50%, -1 to AC, now you have a -10% to your speed. Higher levels will probably see a quicker -2 to AC and quicker speed reduction. But as of right now, for the lower levels, or for anyone who wants to try this out, I have at 25%. So this is now you only have 25% of whatever your fatigue points are. So if you had 10, now you're at 3. Now you're at 3. Now you have a -2. You still have the -1 to AC, but now you also have a -2 to all rolls. So if you have a stat roll, if you have to do a dex check, if you have to do a save, basically you have a -2 because you are exhausted. You're basically focusing on keeping yourself focused and your body's starting to feel all of the aches and pains, so things are going to be a little bit more difficult. And at this point, you are now at 3/4 speed, so you have lost 25% total of your speed. Once you reach 10%, not only do you have a -1 to AC and a -2 to all rolls, and you're at 3/4 speed, you now have a -2, an additional -2 to AC. So you have a total of -3 to your AC, a -2 to all your rolls, and you're at half speed. If you fall to 0%, you are forced unconscious. I'll get to what I mean by that in a second. And if you somehow push beyond 0, you start to drain your life force. Now, this will typically act as either a permanent HP loss or some other mental or physical disability or disfigurement that will be permanent. Kind of just depends on what you're doing. Kind of like in the Dresden, I like to keep this open because similar to the Dresden Files series, Dresden does something, hurts himself because he just pushes too much power through a spell he's using, and he gets a permanent disability for it. I really like that. I think that depending on the situation, I think permanent HP loss, like a permanent, like decrease because you're using your life force, I think would be appropriate. I think physical disfigurement, I think a personal, like a mental scar, nightmares, or even like maybe lost access to a spell. You charged it so much you scarred your brain and now you can't ever access that spell again. But maybe it killed an immortal or something. I don't know. The idea is, I love the idea that you can push beyond it, but if you do, you are going to suffer major consequences because you are essentially using yourself as the magic source. And that is a very big no-no in all the magic spheres. No one else likes to do that. Bards are the only ones that can do that innately. And it's typically not seen as something that others should do, is because when you tap into yourself, it's very dangerous. Bards do it safely because they just naturally overproduce. So, unconscious. Now, I want to talk about the reason why I said that you are forced unconscious. Now, the reason why I say forced unconscious is because when it comes to wizards, I thought about, what happens if they get knocked out. Kind of like what happens with mages. You lose all your spells because you don't have any more memorization. A sorcerer doesn't have to worry about that because their power is inside their items. But a wizard, because you don't memorize anything, because you just have access, I wanted to make unconscious be a little bit more detrimental for situations. And we're going to get to that prison situation because this is where, again, all of those ideas come from. So when you are a wizard, unconscious means that if you are coming out of unconsciousness, you will have no access to your magic. Now, I have a small table that I've done. I think this is pretty well balanced. But the idea is that if you come out of unconsciousness normally, so this is essentially if you're waking up from sleep, a nap. You're coming out normally, or someone gently wakes you up. Basically, nothing normal, nothing out of the ordinary. You will have 1 round of no magic. That's essentially 1 round to wake up. So if you were if you were naturally woken up and then you realize you're surrounded and there is a fight, it's only going to take 1 round for you to be able to hurl your magic around. It's just mainly, unless you can train yourself, maybe you could train yourself to not have that disadvantage, but the idea is 1 round of no magic, gather your thoughts, and then you can basically start hurling your shit around all you want. If you were woken up via surprise, so this would be an ambush, this would be someone yelling, this would be glass breaking, this would be if you were not woken up any way outside of just normally waking up, you will have 1d4 rounds of no magic. This is more of just because it's startled, you have to gather your situation. It could be up to 4 rounds to figure out what's going on. And we've all been there. We all have been woken up by the potentially, I think I'm falling off a cliff feeling, or just the sudden shaking out of bed because, your cat knocked something over. It's going to take you a couple seconds to calm down, gather your thoughts. And with wizards, it's all about focus. It's all about calm and clear-mindedness, and being woken up that quickly is not going to be calm and clear-minded. If you are coming out of an involuntary unconscious. So normal and surprise means you're coming out of like normal consciousness. You fell asleep or whatever. If you were involuntarily knocked unconscious, this could be a knockout potion. This could be a spell to make you go to sleep. This could be because you were exhausted, from traveling all day, and you literally just were kind of involuntarily going to go to sleep because you you just basically pass out on your feet. But anyway, any kind of involuntary sleep, that is 1d4 turns. When you wake from that, it'll be 1d4 turns, because whatever got you to go to sleep, whatever poison, knockout gas, dart, charm, that is messing with your head, and it will take 1d4 turns to clear. So, don't be involuntarily knocked out. Forced. If you were forced unconscious, this is typically psionic. Like, if you are hurt psionically, if you are bludgeoned and knocked unconscious, if you are, again, essentially what you can consider forced unconscious. Hi. If you were considered forced unconscious in any way and you come out of that, you will not be able to do magic for 1d6 turns. That is up to an hour. And that is just because at that point, you might have a concussion. Most likely it's because you were knocked unconscious. And the idea that you were knocked unconscious that much, that kind of concussion, even with your healing factor, will take up to an hour for you to be okay. I think that's pretty balanced. And this will take us into the conversation of what I wanted to talk about before, about like how I got these balancing. And the way that I kind of thought about these balancing situations is, let's say you had a team of all of these mages. You had a bard, you had a mage, you had a sorcerer, you had a wizard. And they all got knocked out and thrown in jail. And they wake up. So I thought about how each of those would be played, and how I approached each one kind of dictated how this balancing was going to work. Because you have the mage, right? The mage is knocked out, they're in prison. So they've knocked out, they've lost all their memory, and their book has been taken. They are fucked. They are the most useless character in the party right out the gate, unless they have tattoos of their spells on them. That's basically it. They don't have any memorization. They're glass cannon without any fodder. I mean, or without a cannonball. Like, they're just a piece of glass. So then I was like, okay, well, I don't always want to play that. Like, I want to have something other than that, but I don't necessarily believe I should just automatically have all my magic, because that's just, saying I don't want to play the game. So with the bard wakes up, they don't have their magical tools, and maybe they've lost their spell slots, like what they've prepped, like, they've practiced it, but they're jumbled, and they don't typically have their magical tools, but they can hum and they can ad-lib. So maybe with bards, if with that ad-lib power that I have, if you have nothing prepped, maybe ad-lib has a max level cap, like a spell level cap. So you can't just ad-lib a 10th level spell at any time. You can only ad-lib like up to a 3rd level spell, if it's not one that you've prepped. But the idea is that they still have access to music of some sort, unless they're gagged and then they can't make music. But without being able to make music, and without, being able to have a situation, yeah, they have access to magic pretty quickly, but I also kind of like the idea that, again, they're more powerful with their magical tools, with their musical tools, or, it doesn't have to be musical either. Bards can also be, a lot of different things. I think one of my favorite bards that I ever got to see in a podcast was one of the Mexican wrestlers. They were a Mexican wrestler as a bard, and it was great. Fantastic series. But yeah, and then we have the sorcerer. So the sorcerer gets knocked out. As long as they don't take his items, he'd be fine. But if they took all of his possessions and he doesn't have those little trinkets, then he's out of luck too, until 24 hours. And then if they've been locked in the cell for 24 hours and his magic's returned, guess what? He can find bits of pieces and make something, perhaps. But that's the idea, is he would have to find something. He'd have to wait the amount of time. So he doesn't have immediate access to his spells. The bard might have immediate access, but they're going to be lower powered because he doesn't have his magical items. So maybe he only gets access by humming to level 1 spells. But that's the idea of, I think each DM would have a different idea for that. So based on the campaign that we're playing and the players that I'm with, I would kind of dictate what type of bard they would have. But those are some of the things that I've played around with in terms of balancing that out. And then you have the wizard. So the wizard is in there. He doesn't have anything to memorize, so he doesn't have anything he's forgotten. But depending on how he got knocked out, if it was forceful, that's up to an hour that he's useless, that he has to sit there with them, right? But eventually he will be able to blow the door off the hinges, but it's not going to be silent. They're not going to sneak out of there. So with that, you have, a lot more at stake, right? You could start blowing, doors open and start taking people on, but as the only magic user, and you only have so much magic in terms of fatigue, and maybe forced unconsciousness doesn't allow you to have your entire fatigue recovery because it's not good rest. You have a lot of these opportunities to make these role play situations with magic users a lot more unique and in depth. And that's kind of what I try to do here. I try to look at a situation where, let's say I had a group of magic users. How would they all react in the same situation? And you don't want a cookie cutter, oh, well, we're all useless. You want them to be useful in different ways. Because again, even the mage who has no access to his magic until he gets his stuff, at least that's an RP and a diplomatic route. At least he has to talk his way out. Everybody else will have different ways to access their magic at different times for different reasons. So that talks about the biggest ones. Now, let's see, how long have I been going for? I gotta get dinner here soon. All right. Where am I looking? I can't believe. Oh wow. Okay. Cool. About an hour and a half. We are almost done, and I can go get food. So, that pretty much covers those major four. Now, I want to cover a few other items. Now, I did create another class that I think is probably going to be the most controversial for most people. So I created my own version of the Warlock. Now, I know Warlock in the lore is pretty much a pact with some sort of greater entity, and you get basically all your other stuff. And you can, and I still allow that. I still allow the pack Warlock. I just don't know if I would call that one a Warlock. I might rename that for my own purposes, just for referencing, but I still don't disagree with it. My Warlock, on the other hand, though, is it is the most expansive in terms of the magic users, because where all the other magic users are at in terms of their development is that they all have their focus in terms of how to access, like we talked about before, how they access magic. Now, a Warlock is a unique one because it is the only one that basically can learn multiple types of magic. So in my realm, I do allow multi-classing up to 3 classes. So you can have a tertiary class. I have a couple of stipulations. Your secondary class can never be higher than your first class, or equal. Can never be higher or equal. It always has to be lower than whatever your primary class is. And your third class can never be higher than your second class. So your second and your tertiary can be equal, but neither can ever be equal or greater than your primary class. And this just adds for a little bit of extra fun play, just because, most people aren't going to take all that time. It's really a big dedicated effort to do that. Most people won't try it, but it is fun to create some characters like that, especially if I'm playing like a higher level game where we're, coming in at 10th level. That might be kind of fun to do. But the reason for this is because I do have some NPCs I needed to have this, as well as I just wanted to try it out. It seemed like a fun class. I have a character that I'm running in my own game, and it's a lot of fun to try it. But basically the idea is that in my realm, you can have your primary class, your secondary class, and then you can take on a tertiary class. Now, if you're a magic user and you have an innate ability to do magic, you can multi-class in magic, although it's typically pretty hard. But yeah, the idea would be that you can multi-class in magic, although it's typically not advised because of the way that I've broken out magic. It would be interesting for roleplay purposes, but you're not going to get a ton of benefits in terms of more usage. It's better to subclass, in my opinion. Unless you want to do a Warlock. And the idea for a Warlock is you would get... you have to do a couple things. First, you have to get to player level 10. So you have to be a level 10 player. You have to be a level 10 player. And you have to have... been a minute since I've gone through all the things. So yeah, so I believe that you have to in order to become a Warlock, you have to be a level 10 player with at least one magical class, or you have to have 2 magical classes. Or no, at least one magical class. by level 10, because then what you need to do is then you can start to at level 10 you can start to multi-class. Anybody can multi-class whenever they want, but at level 10 you would then be able to add either as your second or your third warlock. Typically you'd add it as your third. So by level 10 you'd have 2 magical classes. You'd add the third one as warlock. Now what happens at this point is warlock becomes your primary, and it becomes your player level. So if you're already player level 10, you become warlock level 10 with a sub class of, say, so let's say you were a mage and a bard. So you can have all of the mage classes, but you were also bard. You did 6 levels in bard, you did 4 levels in mage, you're now level 10, now you've added warlock. So now you're a level 10 warlock with 6 bard and 4 mage with those levels. Now at this point, you have all 3 classes. So how do you get more? You can never have more than 3 classes. So this is where being a warlock really comes in handy. Your now second and third classes now have minimums and maximums before you can activate the warlock ability. So once you're a warlock, and that's your primary class, and then you have the subclasses of other mages. Once those subclasses reach level 3 at minimum, but no more than level 5 after you've become a warlock. That's key. After you've become a warlock, the min and max is level 5, level 3 and 5. Before you become a warlock, there is no maximum. That's important. But again, it's all about time dedication. So once you have that, you have to have a second or third. So basically you're a warlock. Let's say now you are a bard 6, mage 4. Now let's say you want to become a sorcerer. You want to learn sorcery powers. Well, in order to do that, you have to free up one of your classes. So in order to free up a class, they have to be a minimum level 3, and any new class a max level 5. So your bard's already level 6. So it's not beholden to the level cap because it's already beyond it. It's another little trick. As long as it's your secondary, but again, we don't need to get into that. But the mage at level 4 wouldn't be able to go beyond level 5 because it's within the level cap. So as a warlock, you have to decide which one of these do you want to lock in. Do you want to say, I'm happy? Now, in this rare instance, you'd be able to make bard up to level 10. But normally you would just say, okay, let's say I'm happy at bard level 6. You are going to then absorb bard. You are now a level 10 warlock. You have level 6 bard. Or you're a level 10 warlock with level 6 bard powers. And you have a secondary class of mage at level 4. And an open tertiary class. And essentially what that does is you'd be able to then say add sorcerer to that. So now you're a warlock, sorcerer, or mage sorcerer, but you do have all the bard up to level 6. The big thing here is that you will never be able to upgrade bard again. And that's why you level cap it. So now what your character would look like is a level 10 warlock as your primary. Your secondary would be a 4th level mage, and your tertiary would be a 1st level sorcerer once you had enough XP to make it level 1. So you have a level 1 sorcerer, and then you have a locked in level 6 bard. You can level up mage to level 5, you can level up sorcerer up to level 5. And then once you're done with those, you could lock those in and open up your other 2, and then add in 1 or 2 more other types. And you can just keep doing this until you have up to level 5 of every type of magic user. And that's pretty much it. To become a warlock, you basically have to, kind of like the traditional warlock, you have to make a pact with something that will let you, or you have to find the ritual that will allow you to become one. It's the only type of magic user that can really do this. Even normally, if you're not doing a warlock, I typically won't allow people to have 3 magic using classes. It's typically only 2. Warlock's the only one that can typically do 3 and more, and that's just kind of its own balancing. But the idea is that you'll max out at level 5, so you'll never be more than level 5 in any of those particular magical classes, except for the very, very first one that you picked. Or if you were smart, you'll do a tertiary, or you'll multi-class, get both of those up to level 10 before you'll go over to Warlock. Because once you're last level 10, don't do Warlock. Like you're already too powerful. It's not even worth it. But again, a Warlock is a time dedicated type of character. It's just meant to see what you can do if you really learned everything. But yeah, it's a fun little thing. I like the idea of being able to progress a character through all the different types of magic and just keep absorbing them. But again, locking them in is in that's it. You can't go back to being a bard later and keep upgrading it. Once it's locked in, it's locked in. That way, if you only want one level in mage just to access something, or one level in, let's say you wanted to, be a psionicist, so you just got one level in psionicist, then you locked it away. That's fine, but that's all you're ever going to get. As long as once you've locked it in. And that pretty much takes care of that's a lot of the standard ones. Now, of course, that doesn't really cover divine magic, which covers your clerics and your paladins and a bunch of others. But divine magic, I mean, let's face it, divine magic comes from the divine. It comes from some sort of larger being, larger entity. They get to decide everything that happens with it. It's some sort of deal. Or agreement. So, I mean, there's not really a whole lot to go off of that. I don't have a ton outside of holy warriors, which that'll be a whole episode on its own. But I do have other types of magic used as well. I haven't skipped them all. These are the primary ones that I've talked about: bard, mage, sorcerer, wizard, and warlock. Those are the ones that I've really focused on the most. But, the others that I really like to have in my realm, that I do have in my realm, I just have them under different categories. So I have the elementalist type of magic users. What falls under here? Psionicists fall under this. Monks, rangers, because at least with these guys, monks, it's all about their ki, their own energy. And with that, I like the idea that this is a different type of element, right? It's kind of like a mantle, right? So there isn't an elemental plane of ki in D&D. But the fact that ki was discovered, the fact that body energy can be manipulated, there now needs to be a mantle of power for that. There needs to be a mantle, meaning there needs to be a station that power resides under, and that is the mantle that, say, monks would have access to. Psionicists, they're all about the mental powers. They've been able to see the world. They kind of like how a bard vibes with the world on a spiritual level. Psionicists they can feel magic in their head. They can do magic in ways that nobody else can, because the tools are just understood inside their head, and they have a unique aspect of doing that. I almost made them meta magic, but there are other reasons why it makes more sense that they're on the elemental level of magic. I also put rangers and druids here because, again, they are the elementalists. I like to consider all that they are communicating with magic. Druids, rangers, monks, these are people that are dealing with magic on a communication level. They're making requests. They're working with it. I also put, I created, I mentioned this in my other stream, I created 4 bender classes, airbenders, firebenders, earthbenders, waterbenders. They're all under the elements because they're communicating with the elements. They're communicating with nature in the very elemental essence of these things. And I like the idea that it's more of a harmonious relationship with these, whereas you have mage, sorcerer, and wizard. I consider these are more controllers. These control magic. Bard, they vibe. They vibe with it. They vibe with the energies, and it just works with them. Warlocks, they dominate. They are all about dominating every aspect of magic. The elementalists, they're all about communicating. And then I have the other level of my meta mages, like my meta magic. This, whereas elementalists, their title, I give them the title of most natural. Whereas meta magic, they're the most experimental, and this one's all about negotiating. So unlike communicating, where druids and monks they're working with the energy on a natural basis, or the mages that are trying to control magic, meta magic users, they see and feel magic, so it's more of a negotiation. Like artificers fall under this, and alchemists, like the Full Metal Alchemists, they understand the world on a different fundamental level. They see things. Artificers see the flow of energy, how energy flows through things, and how they can influence that flow. So they're negotiating to make these objects work in a way that nobody else could. Nobody else could just put these things together and somehow make it work, but artificers do. Alchemists understand a logical way that mages don't. They understand how to manipulate things on a negotiable level because theirs all about the equivalent exchange, right? Theirs is all about equality and balance. So they're all about negotiations, and I do like having them set up kind of like that. Another unique thing about my realm that I put up here is that elementalists, most of their magic cannot be dispelled, at least in the sense of like dispel magic. The basic dispel magic wouldn't work on most of what they do. And then I also didn't mention that with elementalists, this is based on wisdom. Metamage, those are based on intelligence because again, it's more about understanding. Um, and then yeah, there's meta magic you can learn. Most of it's learnable, but it's better if it's innate, but it can be learned. And then elementalists, that's all pretty much innate, so you can't really learn most of what they can do. Which is again why I think I did psionics. Yeah, the reason why I put psionics over there is you can't really learn psionics. That's something that has to come to you. Same thing with like a druid, and same thing with benders. Those are things that just come to you. Whereas with alchemists and artificers, you could probably learn it with enough. Like you could probably try enough. And that is magic in High Point. That's I think.